Hello and welcome. You're watching News of the Hour. I'm Ankita Mukherjee, and you can catch these updates on the news and the deeper events behind the headlines on youtube.com/NDTV. Well, today we're going to focus on a bail hearing. And it's a bail hearing with a difference because no actual verdict has been passed by the court yet, but it's a significant bail hearing because of the observations made by the judge while she was hearing the details of the case. What are we talking about? Well, the judge making some significant observations, including as if the Jama Masjid is in Pakistan. What is all this about? Let's back up for the moment and tell you about the case itself. This was the bail plea hearing of Bhim Army Chief Chandrashekhar Azad, who in fact protested in Delhi on the 20th of December. This was a massive protest against the Citizenship Amendment Act and the new citizenship law that makes religion a basis for determining citizenship. But he protested along with a massive crowd of people outside Delhi's iconic Jama Masjid in the old city area of Delhi. On the 20th of December, he held up a copy of the Constitution and he talked about why the Citizenship Amendment Act is against the Constitution. And this was attended by many people. Now, at the time of those protests, the Delhi police cracked down. They, in fact, tried to catch Bhim Army Chief Chandrashekhar Azad on the day of those protests. However, he managed to give them the slip. He was arrested just a day later and charged with very serious charges, including rioting and arson. Well, today his bail plea came up for hearing at a Delhi court, and Additional Sessions Judge Dr. Kamini Lal was the judge who was hearing those details. Let's take you through exactly what happened. Let's in fact get those proceedings in court up for you. Well, the public prosecutor, who in this case represents the Delhi police and for that matter the centre, argued that it was Chandrashekhar Azad who incited violence. They were arguing against his getting bail. The government in fact said Azad asked people to gather at the Jama Masjid despite not having any permissions for such a gathering. They went on to say, the court in fact at that point intervened and said, but what is wrong with protests per se? To which in fact, and the court then went on to say that it is after all one's constitutional right to protest. Now, the government said that there was no permission for the protest at Jama Masjid being a religious place, to which also the judge had a very sharp and direct answer. Where is the violence? Now, the public prosecutor also going on to argue that the problem was Chandrashekhar Azad's social media posts that had actually exhorted people to come to this particular protest. And the judge observed, what is wrong with any of these posts? Now, what about the posts themselves? Now, this actually gave a bit of a controversy in court because the public prosecutor said that Chandrashekhar Azad's posts were objectionable and they couldn't actually be shared in court, to which the judge wanted to know why this was the case. And Chandrashekhar Azad's own lawyers also argued that there was nothing terribly objectionable about these posts, at which point the government's lawyer, the public prosecutor, tried to argue that these needn't be shared. The judge wanted to know whether they were in fact covered by any kind of privilege. That was not the case. So the public prosecutor in fact had to read out some of Chandrashekhar Azad's social media posts in court. And once they were read out, the judge wanted to know exactly what was wrong with these posts, because all they were doing was asking people to come to these protests. They didn't say anything that was violent. They didn't say anything that would incite hatred among communities or anything else that was objectionable. The court saying, who says you cannot protest? In fact, the court asking the public prosecutor and for that matter the Delhi police, who the public prosecutor was have you in fact read the Constitution? So the court upholding people's rights to democratic protests as being part of the Constitution. Then the public prosecutor argued about the location, the fact that these protests were happening in Jama Masjid, a religious place, and saying that Section 144 was in place and therefore this protest needed official permission, prior permission from the Delhi police, to which the court said, and this perhaps is the most important comment, you are behaving as if Jama Masjid is in Pakistan. And then the court goes on to qualify, even if it was Pakistan, you could go there and protest because Pakistan was once part of undivided India. So the court making it clear that it doesn't matter where you protest, you have a democratic right to protest no matter what. And now the government arguing once again that police permission was necessary for these protests and that Section 144 was imposed in that area because it was a religious place. The court then saying what permission? The Supreme Court has said the repeated use of Section 144 is abuse. So the judge in this case was referring to the Supreme Court judgment just last week where in reference to Kashmir, the Supreme Court had said the repeated use of Section 144 to shut down dissent was in fact abuse. What is Section 144? It is the section which prohibits the assembly of more than 4 people in any given place. And that, of course, is the section that is used repeatedly to try and fob off protests of any kind or any kind of large gathering. Then the court said, show the law that prohibits protests outside a religious place. And of course, there is no such law. The court pointing that out, then asking, is there any question or any evidence of violence by Azad? And at this point, Azad's own lawyers have said no case can be made out against Azad. They are arguing effectively that these are boilerplate charges that have been leveled against him, that this is just a matter of trying to suppress his right to protest, his right of dissent, and that there is really no case against him. No violence took place, they say. What did Azad do exactly? Azad stood in a group of hundreds upon hundreds of people and read out the preamble of the Indian Constitution. Now, this is something that people have been doing in protests against the Citizenship Amendment Act, in protest after protest around the country. So he did absolutely nothing that was different than any of these other protests. So the government then says drone footage and other evidence prove that Chandrashekhar Azad in fact made an inflammatory speech at this gathering. But we need more time to produce that evidence. So even here, the judge wanted to know, the Delhi police has in fact many other instances where they have recorded footage, including of the Jamia violence and elsewhere. So why is it that they don't have footage of this particular incident? So for the moment, and in fact, the government also talking about how another FIR has been registered against Azad in Uttar Pradesh, trying to say that in fact he's a repeated offender and therefore bail shouldn't be given, to which the court asked, okay, what are the details in these FIRs? And the public prosecutor, the government's lawyer, was unable to give those details and in fact was wrapped by the lawyer for that also. Now, the judge in fact went on to say that she had seen many protests, including outside Parliament, including outside religious places. She said people who protest outside Parliament go on to become politicians, and famous ones at that. So, in fact, these protests by people who are coming out on the streets are necessary. Necessary because what was not said in Parliament during the debates on the Citizenship Amendment Act are being said now by the citizens of India on the streets, and going on really to stress why there is this need to continue to protest. In fact, the judge said right before adjourning today's hearing, and this part is very important and I want to read this out for you. In the colonial era, the protests were out on the roads, but your protest can be legal inside the courts too. Inside the Parliament, things which should have been said were not said, and that is why people are out on the streets. We have the full right to express our views, but we cannot destroy our country. So the judge, in fact, making a very speaking case for the right to protest, and these observations are going to be very critical for other cases also. For instance, remember the cases of S.R. Darapuri and Sadaf Jafar, both Ambedkarites. S.R. Darapuri, in fact, a former, a retired IAS officer, a retired bureaucrat. Sadaf Jafar, a theatre activist, also a Congress worker, she was in fact arrested in Uttar Pradesh for posting a live Facebook from one of these, she did a Facebook live from one of these protests, and S.R. Darapuri in fact had posted a social media update saying that there were protests taking place, and they also face similar boilerplate charges. They are currently out on bail. So what the judge has said today actually sets a precedence for all these other cases as well. So these remarks are going to be crucial going ahead, and that is something that Chandrashekhar Azad's own lawyer has also talked about today. So the Bhim Army chief's bail hearing will now take place tomorrow at 2 p.m. And of course, what the judge says on that occasion is going to be key. Thanks for watching. youtube.com/NDTV.